it says standby, now it says REC. Hooray! All right.
Good job.
Fonzie.
So Dick's gonna try to put that on your website. A fresh start. January 1st, 2015, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. It always amazes me to watch the crowds in Times Square celebrating on New Year's Eve and singing Auld Lang Syne and saying goodbye to the past year and moving on and welcoming this. It's wide.
Stay in the picture. Stay in the picture.
Sorry?
Stay in the picture.
Oh, the picture is this wide. Don't worry.
Don't worry about it. They don't hear you.
Yeah. Anyways, as though somehow yesterday and last year is gone, and I think that that poem that Kim read is absolutely right. There is the past, but the past is always the possibility of the future and who we are. And we don't just close that and leave it somehow behind. That there's a connection between last year and this year. And it always strikes me as how we sometimes think that it's magically different between December 31st and January 1st. Or between January 31st and February 1st. This is a new month. I turned my calendar over, got a new picture today, and entering a new month. It's a fresh start, beginning again, and yet really there's not much difference between yesterday and today. It was cold yesterday, it's cold today. I had to get up and let the dogs out, let them back in again and feed them. I had to feed the cat. I had to wash, she brushed my teeth. I had to drive down here. There's not much difference from day to day to day, and yet somehow we sometimes think that magically things can change. We can make New Year's resolutions, for instance. How many of you made New Year's resolutions? How many of you are still doing those New Year's resolutions? I can't tell you how many New Year's resolutions I made in my lifetime. I made one about, I'm going to say 12 or 15 years ago. I made one resolution. It's the only one I've ever been able to keep. I decided I was no longer going to make any more New Year's resolutions. And I've been able to maintain that. I've told you before about my battle with giving up smoking. I had done it several times. And then finally gave up on May 29th, 1975, which was the day that we discovered we were going to be parents. And in reflecting on that, I recognize that if we make changes in our lives, if we do make fresh starts, if we do change, it actually requires three things. The first thing that I think that it requires is an awareness that we need to make a change. Sometimes it's an awareness that is forced upon us. It can be a critical event of some kind. Sometimes it's just our own internal realization that we're unsatisfied or incomplete or need something that we're missing and we need to do something differently. But the first thing that it takes is actually an awareness of wanting to be able to make a fresh start, wanting to be able to turn the page and turn over a new leaf and to move forward. It doesn't just accidentally sort of happen magically. It requires an awareness and an intent on our own part. And I think of the many critical events that have happened in my life that have awakened me to the possibility of change and the possibility of being new and somehow something different. When I was in college, I was a science major, so I was fortunate enough to be able to find a job in a local hospital working evenings in a laboratory. And it gave me spending money, gave me something to do, gave me a little experience in the job market. After I quit college and went into the Naval Reserve to avoid the draft, and then came back and went to college and got married, it was just a natural thing because I had some experience to return to hospital laboratory work. I did that for a while. became a supervisor and then a manager and then became an administrator and spent 15 years in medical health. Wound up working at a large medical center in Boston, commuting about an hour and a half each way every day. And as I said, I did that for about 15 years. And then in the 80s, during the recession and the crunch, hospitals had to change a lot of their policies about employment and human resources and the way they treated their employees. And I found myself in a very untenable position, unable to sell the new policies to the many people that I was responsible for, and eventually had to resign on principle. And found myself all of a sudden unemployed with 2 kids and a mortgage and 2 dogs, no cats. And realizing that this was unexpected, and realizing that I had been on a journey that had never been intentional. I had never chosen that career. It had been the path of least resistance. It had been something I could do. It had been something that I had been successful at. And yet I didn't necessarily enjoy it. It didn't feel like it was me. So I was faced with the dilemma of, so now what? What am I going to do? Who am I? What do I want to become? And I really didn't have a clue, because I hadn't done this sort of self-examination, this sort of self-awareness before. The local post office was hiring part-time people, so I went and I worked part-time at the post office. And this was during the era when going postal became popular as a phrase. Not one of the better places to work. Not a lot of self-actualization. But as a more responsible person with some experience, I wound up being hired as the superintendent, the assistant to the postmaster, and made pretty good money. And it was right across the street from the library where my wife worked. Our 2 kids went to school down the street, so I got to coach them in basketball and in softball and in baseball. Got home often right about the time they got home from school, and it was easy. It was pleasant. It was nice. It was a nice, smooth, easy life. So I wound up there for 7 years, never having thought about it much. But during that time, I had become increasingly involved in the church. I taught religious education. I did the stewardship campaign. I became president. Everybody has to be president sooner or later. Who hasn't been president yet? And I was discovering that that's where I found some satisfaction in my life, some fulfillment. And so my wife and I had been talking with my minister, our minister, for a long time, of course, on business and other things, and being perplexed about who I was going to be, what I was going to do. And she kept asking me, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? For 7 years, she kept asking me, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And we made long lists, my wife and I, about pros and cons of different things. And then one day I came home from a meeting at church, and I asked my wife, I said, well, what would you think if I went to seminary? And she said, oh my God. So we talked about that, made pros and cons a list, and it took a little while. But one day, not too long after that, we were at church, and our minister, she misquoted or paraphrased Rabbi Hillel with that famous, if not me, who, and if not now, when. And so we decided I was going to go to seminary. So I quit my job and I went to seminary. Not knowing what came after that. Well, that was 24 years ago. And it's been wonderful ever since. And I realized that if I hadn't had to quit my job in the medical field, I don't know that I would have wound up here. I wouldn't know all of you. And that sometimes it takes something to come to us to wake us up because we're not willing or experienced enough to see what we're doing and not doing and make a choice. It sometimes is forced upon us, or enlightenment can be a gift that we receive, however we want to look at it. I was talking a couple of weeks ago with a young couple in Dover, and they said I could share this with you. And they said, oh, absolutely. We did all of our homework. We decided we were going to have children. So they have a 16-month-old now. And Teddy was born, and they were all prepared for that. And we brought Teddy home. And Teddy was not a very mild child. A lot of problems. And they said it was really, really tough. And that it was far tougher than they had anticipated, far tougher than they were prepared for. But they had to really stop and consider the choice that they had made and make a commitment to it. And to become parents, to change their whole notion of identity, to be the parents that they thought was going to just be an easy transition, and to recognize that it took a lot more work. And it takes a lot more than just deciding on it then. And that's the second part. There's actually three parts to this. The second part, I think, of making a fresh start, starting over, moving on, whatever you want to call it, means identifying who we are. It means just not recognizing that we need to make a change, but we need to recognize who we are. Not only who we want to become, but who we currently are ourselves. And so what's possible within the realm, the universal realm of change? I had knee surgery 2 years ago, and my doctor told me that I couldn't play tennis for 12 weeks. After 4 or 5 weeks, he told me I needed to begin to work on my knee. So I needed to either buy a stationary bike or join a gym. And I couldn't do impact, but to do cycling with resistance and work on my knee. So I joined a gym and went faithfully 4 days a week and pedaled 2 or 3 miles. In 4 weeks. And it worked my knee up, and it got better and it got better. Well, it wound up 16 weeks before I could go back to play tennis. But then I got back to playing tennis, and fortunately, it's been good ever since then. But I remained joined to the gym. I thought, well, I play tennis 2 or 3 days a week. On the days that I don't play tennis, I'll go to the gym. So after about 3 months of not going to the gym on the days that I didn't play tennis, I realized that I was still paying a monthly rate to go to the gym, and I thought, well, in the winter, in the inclement weather, maybe I'll go. So I went for another 3 or 4 months, and finally I held up my hands and I said, I'm not going to the gym. And so I canceled my membership. How many of you have done that? How many of you have joined a gym with the best of intentions, or anything else with the best of intentions, and realized that it's not you? And I think that's an important part of this process, is looking at who am I, and realizing that I might want to do this, or think I want to do this, but if it isn't who I am and it doesn't fit into my life, and it's not authentic to me, I'm really not going to be very successful at it. I can't make myself, make me be somebody that I'm not. So part of it is to know the limitations, and then to work within those in terms of our choices and the paths that we might select to follow. I know that one of the stories I also told you is about getting dumped out of the raft in the rapids at the Deerfield River, coming up further down the river and seeing this blue sky and hearing the birds and being aware of a whole new perception, being resurrected. And experiencing the world in a new sort of a way, being more aware in the moment, being more conscious of being aware in the moment, and of the possibilities in every moment. And I know that I've told you too about being at God's Golden Acre in South Africa and being asked by Rebecca if we would sponsor a child, and in the moment going, I can't afford that, and saying yes, and then going home and deciding how am I going to come up with $2,000 a year and explain it to Mary. And getting home and explaining it to Mary, and she said, well, if we're supporting a boy, we should be supporting a girl too. Which is one of the reasons I like her. I got an email yesterday from Nanjabula, who is now, should be starting her senior year. Yeah, and she's actually working with the school council. She's in boarding school, which actually costs $5,000 a year now. And working with the counselors there and looking at university. And I'm going, how do I explain that to Mary? But her senior dance is coming up the end of this month, and she was saying how frightening it is to think about inviting a boy to go to the dance with her. So I had to write her back, and I was thinking, boy, have we come a long way. And realizing that if I hadn't said yes in that moment 10 years ago, I wouldn't be in this predicament today and have this wonderful relationship and this opportunity. So part of it is knowing who I am, making the adjustment about who I think I am and want to be, and then embracing that and becoming that. And realizing that I need to say yes far more often in my life. I need to say yes and embrace the uncertainty and allow that to unfold in whatever way it is. And to realize that there are unknowns, blessings that can far exceed my expectations if I'm willing to be authentic and to say yes. The third thing I want to say is that I was reading in Huffington Post an article by a woman, I don't remember her name. She was writing about New Year's resolutions, and she was agreeing with me, which I always appreciate, and saying that she'd made countless resolutions over the years too, and she realized that she'd kept very few of them. And so she was cynical about making a New Year's resolution, making a fresh start, trying something new, because she's had troubles following through with that. We can do it on sheer will for a certain amount of time, but then if it's not truly us, we can't continue it indefinitely. It doesn't really become a part of who we are. And she was saying that she had always wanted to write, be a journal writer. She enjoyed writing, wanted to keep a journal, wanted to share some deep thoughts, explore her thoughts in a deeper, sort of systematized kind of a way. Not that she would have to write a diary perhaps every day, but she wanted to explore creative writing and to really process some of her thinking and some of her experiences. And so she had made herself do that for a certain amount of time, but it was such an effort to do on her own. And she was talking with a group of her friends one day at lunch or something, and they said, well, you know, I felt that way too. I'd like to do that, but I've never been able to do it. So they started this journal club, and they decided that they would meet once every 2 months. And when they came together once every 2 months, they would bring the things that they had written, and they would share them with each other. And she found that that liberated her and allowed her to do it not as an obligation so much, but as a community process, as something that she shared with other people, as gifts that she could give not only to herself, but to them as well. And she found that she could do this, and it became a new way of life for her, because it wasn't just about her. It was about being with other people that were doing it as well, and participating in their processes as well as her own processes. Which leads to the third thing I think is true about making a fresh start, moving on, whatever. We can't really do it on our own. We can do it again for a while on sheer guts and willpower, But it really takes support. It takes a support group, it takes a community, it takes partners, it takes whatever. It takes the interest and the energy and enthusiasm of other people that enable us to make these changes and make a fresh start. And there again, it's in my life, I look back on it and I decided to go to seminary. And I thought, wow, this is so different. This is really going to shock people. And I worried a little bit about telling all my friends and family. They thought I'd be crazy. So I did. I notified people. And I was the only one that was surprised. Nobody else was. Our good friend Jack said, duh. It's about time. And I realized that here again I had not been paying attention, and that all these people were glad for me and supported me in this new effort. We had a family meeting, my wife and our 2 kids who were in middle school at the time, and my wife, very articulate, very glib, very intelligent woman, said, he's going to be so much easier to live with. So we formed this little family corporation and distributed responsibilities, and we worked through it. And we had a purpose in mind, to get Dad through seminary. And of course the UUA was helpful too. So I guess I'd just like to wind up by saying, and asking you to reflect on your own experiences about change, fresh start in your life, and how it's been successful and perhaps now how it's not been successful. And to look at it not so much with regrets and recriminations, wishful thinking or celebratory, but in an analytical sort of way, and ask yourself, what does this process look like for me? And how can I best do that? How can I make a fresh start in my life? Just one more example. I speak with a lot of people who are having difficulties in their relationships, often a marriage, or having difficulty with a partner, a life partner, or whatever. And they struggle with what to do with that. And they're unsatisfied, they're disappointed, whatever, angry sometimes, or whatever. And they make long lists of what to do. And how many of us have ever been in uncertain circumstances where we make long lists and it doesn't seem to be able to help? Well, there's that wonderful book out there called The Tipping Point, if you've read it. And that's often what it requires. It requires one significant final thing. It can be something that wasn't on the list before. It can be one thing that outweighs 10 things on the other side. But there's that one little something that comes along that says enough is enough. Or that says, this is what I want. Something that tips the balances. That's the critical moment that I've been mentioning, of either self-awareness that either comes to us or we find ourselves. And then if that some tipping point comes and it's authentically who it is, who we are, and allows us to see that that's it, that's the critical point, that's me, that's who I am, that's who I shall become, then that whole decision-making process, that whole shift, becomes almost a fait accompli. It becomes far less of an effort. It becomes far less of a practice and less of a discipline, and it becomes freeing and liberating, and we can actually begin to embrace that. And we need help in doing that. We need people to be with us in that. So I'd like to open this up to a little bit of a conversation and hear some of your thoughts on this notion of
Just push it.
hello.
Kind of hold it for a few seconds. Kind of hold it for
I think it was on. Here, it's on. It's on. Yeah, I'll pass it around for you.
I'll
Unless
pass
you
it.
want to.
Yeah.
You can.
Mine.
Great.
I did see some heads bobbing. I think it was an agreement, but I'm not sure.
Well, thank you as always, Greg, and very enlightening, and I think particularly at a great sermon for us to have as we kick off our stewardship campaign, and look to make some growth plans in our own congregation and recognize that it's a great opportunity. We probably have to think about some changes, but once we've made that it will flow and that it will work and that we will grow. Thank you.
That makes sense. Thanks. The critical moment being David saying he was going to retire and everyone having to decide, okay, so now what do we do? And then looking around. And I would stress this strongly for you folks, is that authenticity piece. In terms of making a change, trying to raise some more money and to grow and to be something different. Who are you as a congregation? And who do you want to become? Because if who you want to become is consistent with who you are, then I think you'll be successful at it. If you try to put something on yourself that you're not, then that can be problematic in our personal lives and in our corporate lives. I think that if you want to change too much, it might be difficult. But if there's a consistency and a flow, and you all get in it together. Did you have your hand up?
You just answered.
No.
That was very good.
What were you going to say?
I was going to ask, is there one of the three steps that are more, in your experience, that are more difficult? And for us, I think what you said is the second one.
Oh, absolutely. Authenticity is really tough. How many of you are authentic? I am. I know who I am. Except that, of course, I don't. It's so hard because we think we know who we are. We know who we think we want to portray ourselves as being. How many of you ever, one of the wonderful things that I often do is ask people to write their eulogy.
Oh, yeah.
Write your eulogy. Go home and do that tonight. Write your eulogy. Your family will welcome you because then they won't have to write it when you're gone. Write your eulogy, read through it, and say, this is great. And then sit down and write the eulogy that one of your friends or spouses or family members would write. And see if they're the same thing. The things that I would like to be remembered for and the things that people are going to remember me for are not necessarily the same things. I'm sometimes the hardest person to know me because I'm biased. It's a subjective view, of course. One of the things that I often tell people is, you want to know who you are? You want to know who you are? Look at your checkbook. Or in my case, Quicken on the computer when it works. I was doing that shortly before Christmas. And Quicken will do a little pie chart. And it'll show me where I spend all my money. And that is illuminating. Where do I spend my money? Which is my life force. That is my blood, sweat, and tears. So what are my values in practice, not in theory? And I looked at that, and I looked at the amount of money under entertainment, which includes port. And I said to Mary, I said, we're spending too much money under entertainment. What are we going to do? This is lovely. She said, well, I saw a YouTube thing that went viral this week about the elephant retirement place in Tennessee. You know that place? Retired elephants go to a place in Tennessee. It's a non-profit organization that Look it up. So we decided that we each were gonna donate $25 a month to this retirement home for elephants in Tennessee, which is $50 a month. So it comes around towards Christmas, and we said, let's give Rachel, our daughter, $25 a month to the elephant retirement home, Whitney and our son and his wife Diana. So we spend $125 a month we send to the elephant retirement home in Tennessee. And that just feels wonderful. You can go on their website and they have live cams so you can watch the elephants. And our daughter and our son and his wife, for the rest of this year, they will know that they are participating in this. But it's hard to know who we are, hard to know what our value system is. So I recommend, you want to know who you are? Look at your checkbook.
I would also suggest another way you might find out who you are. This is what works for me, is to look at my calendar and to see what the days hold in a month and in a year. And just speaking for this congregation, I know the work that we're engaged in from the very beginning, and it keeps increasing as we reach out and live our principles out in the community, and we're getting more and more known, and people are coming and respecting what we do, and I think that's a huge piece of it too.
Yeah. Thank you, that's absolutely there too. Look at your calendars, and especially, perhaps, Annie, look at what you do in terms of volunteerism for this community, for UUCR. Because a lot of times we can think of ourselves as fully involved until we look and we realize that maybe we go on Sundays, but what committees do I belong to? What work do I volunteer with? What other things do I do that nurtures and encourages this community? What do I pledge to this community? How do I support this community? And seriously look at that. Not with this notion that, well, I think that's who I am in this community, but really assess it. And I think that's that awakening moment. Here again, I was so busy in my church for a long time, and it was my minister, she said to me, she said, have you ever considered going to seminary? So, if you get involved, you too might wind up going to seminary.